Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest episode of the DotPro Wednesday show. I'm here, as usual, with my co-host, Shrew. I am, of course, Korean Barbecue, and with us today is Scant. How's it going, guys?
It's going pretty well this side. It's quite late, so I just got through quite a busy day. I was statting for Dream League. Before that, I was doing some casting and a little bit of this and that. Yeah, I'm alright. Shrew, how are you doing?
I'm just happy to have another week of the show, another week of a guest. Welcome to the show, man. I've actually been listening to a couple of your casts for a long time, and do a good job on the analyst desk, and I'm excited to ask you a couple questions with my boy KBBQ.
Well, thanks. I appreciate the positive feedback. I never realized until now that Jack's nickname was Korean Barbecue. I don't know why. Like, that's the most obvious thing in the world now, but I was always just like, what are these letters? What is this name?
Yeah, it's a pain to say, but I'll just do whatever is easiest. Jack, usually. Jackie.
Oh, yeah, I guess it was a bit of a... But, well, Anthony, you were one of multiple people that had the pleasure of meeting in Shanghai, and something that maybe wasn't talked about as much, there were a lot of people, we've heard all the bad things about Shanghai and all that, but, some people might have a bit of a different perspective, and as far as Shanghai goes, there are a lot of people who worked really hard kind of behind the scenes or maybe in an unsung fashion. When I think about, say, some of the Mars TV people who were just stuck in their offices or booths for like a day and a half, like without being able to leave and sleeping there. And of course, you yourself, along with Bonnie, I think you had to do, was it stats for every single game and go on the panel. So you had some very long days as well. And, again, we appreciate your hard work and all that. So what were your thoughts basically on the major, or talk about the lead up to it and all of that?
I think it was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. It was a learning experience. I got to meet people, got to talk, got challenged, got a lot of work to do. And I mean, I'm not really that into the stats work, to be honest. And I mean, I'm not afraid to say it. I told Bruno when he offered me the job to start with, and I was really happy that I got the opportunity to do paneling. And you're right. So I was myself and Bonnie were two of the only people who were on shift pretty much. I think probably the only people on shift permanently throughout the entire tournament. And it's kind of funny because when they first asked me to go on the panel, it was because some of the panelists were too tired. And like in one respect, that's like, well, hello, I'm having the least breaks, but at the same time, it was just like such a great opportunity, and really what I wanted to be at the major to do is like analysis and not statting. So I was obviously going to find a way to do it, and I don't know, it's not. I just feel like I have a knee-jerk reaction to people complaining about stuff, which is that it's like I'm used to the context that I come from. People who complain about stuff are usually very privileged, like people with a serious problem of having an inflated sense of entitlement, and so I'm like very kind of like my default position when it comes to complaining about problems or complaining about having too much to work is to not complain and just get done with it and do the things. And I react quite negatively to people who instinctively just complain very quickly about things. So I mean, with that in mind, like coming from that context, I do think that even though there were obviously a lot of serious problems at the major, that there was also a lot of really good stuff. As you said, there were definitely people part of the Chinese production who worked very hard, did a great job. Peter Zhang was one of the main people from Perfect World. I really respect him and the work that he did. And some of the Mars TV people, I don't know them by name. I remember I was asking Bunny at some point. There was one guy from the Mars TV production team who like wore glasses all the time, and I think he was responsible for the overlay stuff, who was like really, really good. And I could tell he was good even though I couldn't communicate with him. That's how good he was. And also, yeah, obviously a lot of the talent, and you guys, the translators, like this Jack KBBQ person, and most of the translators, but especially you and Helen, and obviously Bonnie, you ended up being more than a translator. And I enjoyed talking to most of the translators, especially the ones that were around all the time and doing a lot of work. And I felt like maybe part of that is that in some sense you guys were also maybe complaining a bit less. And I mean, you guys had it rough as well. There were a lot of issues in terms of like getting passes and all that kind of stuff. But I do feel like when I spoke to you, when I spoke to Helen, and you guys had complaints, it wasn't like with a, I don't know. Maybe I'm just remembering things differently because I like you guys. It seems somehow different.
So you did mention that we're going to back up a little bit. You did mention that you were from were the cultural background and stuff. So you're from South Africa, which is not really a huge, say, piece of the Dota 2 radar. So can you talk about what it was like, say, playing Dota there and what that's like, and maybe your journey to these different events, or what server do you even play on?
We have our own servers. Actually, I was just about to say, I mean, Koreans don't have servers, Philippines don't have servers, South Africa actually has servers, but I don't play on them because like you can't play ranked on South African servers. It's like there aren't enough people searching ranked. So, and there's like South African groups for Dota 2 on Facebook with like a few thousand people in them, and once every few months someone like tries to make a drive for like, let's all start searching ranked, and then we can all play ranked. But honestly, even if everyone did search ranked, the quality would be really poor. What would happen is there'd be like, there's 5 or 10 of us who are like very clearly better at this point, who'd probably just all get to like 8 or 9k farming everyone else. So it would just be like completely misleading. So South Africans who take Dota seriously play ranked on Europe West, and we get about 200 ping. Some people get a bit, like, I used to get 250, now I'm down to about 200, sometimes 180. You can't really go lower than 150. Like, the very best you could possibly get is 150. So that's just what we're playing on. And there's some South Africans who've gotten to as high as 6k or 6.3, 6.4 with that, which is pretty impressive. I'm like currently at 5.7k MMR, not too bad. Still going for the 6k dream. I've been playing Dota for a very, very long time. Probably, I don't know, 10, 11 years, since like 2004, 2005. Started off just like, okay, I mean, so for a brief history, I grew up playing chess. At some point, my interest in chess became an interest in Magic the Gathering. I was always competitive at both. So I played provincially for chess, and then Magic the Gathering. I actually went to a pro tour last year, made day 2, which is pretty cool.
Oh wow, awesome!
Whoa.
Like, you guys into MTG, you know what that is, right? It's like,
yeah. I watch random. I watch random like pro tour top 8s or day 1, day 2s and stuff too. So, are you in any of the coverage videos?
No, I'm not in any coverage videos. Unfortunately, I didn't. I played against a lot of the top players actually, but none of them like on the main stage or anything. It was the Modern Pro Tour last year. I think it was Fate Reforged.
Wow! All right, awesome, dude.
And that's funny because Modern was a format I'd never played, and then I like made it to that Pro Tour and just like started practicing, and actually managed to make day 2. I've got some really, I mean, I don't know if this is the time for it, but I've got some great stories from that Pro Tour actually. Like when I played Owen Turtenwald, he's like, at the time people had thought he was the best player in the world. He beat me on like an outright bluff. Like literally it was a one game for me. We were 1-all in game 3, and he bluffed a victory on like hoping that I might not perfectly understand a rule. It's quite an incredible thing. But anyway, maybe that's for another time. The point I was trying to make is I started on chess, went to Magic, and then at some point we were playing Magic tournaments near Internet Cafe, and afterwards we'd go to the Internet Cafe and we'd play games, and at some points it was like this game, that game, and eventually it was Dota. And I think when I was 16 or 17, my family got internet at home, and then as soon as I could play Dota at home, it was just like, since then till now, I've basically been like Dota, and I wanted to be. I think the way that most people in the industry start, I'm not sure. I wanted to be like a professional player for as long as I knew it was a thing, and at some point I decided like, let's just be realistic about this. I'm probably more likely to make it in the industry doing something other than playing. And I have a background in philosophy. I've done a lot of teaching, I've done a lot of writing, and so I thought, well, why not just start writing stuff? I started a blog, I got noticed by sites, I started writing for sites. You start meeting people, and then eventually it was, you get this casting opportunity, you get this static opportunity. I don't know, do you want me to go into how each of the things that I've done have come up? Because they all have their own little stories.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is all pretty interesting to me because it's like it's a similar path in some ways. Like I think we all have those like kind of pro aspirations and stuff. And Dota is a game that has hooked a lot of us for a lot longer than some of us will often admit. I mean, a lot of us have been playing for a long time. So yeah, I'd love to hear about how you got to that path. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I was always. Like I'm very well known in South Africa for Dota, have been forever, because I was always the best captain, I guess you could say, and my team was the best for a very, very long time. And up until maybe a couple of years ago, there was no one who could ever beat us. And then eventually there was this big tournament. Like South Africa has one major LAN every year with like quite a big prize pool relative to our country anyway. And there was one year that we lost, and then after that, basically, I left my team and like made a new team with 4 of the people in the team that had beaten my team.
Wow.
It sounds terrible, I know, but it was like more like we are the people who wanted to be serious and like try and compete internationally, and like my team was like people who wanted to just like go drinking every night instead of practicing. But the dynamic didn't work out, and so this is, I mean, part of my story about like realizing I should do something else was also that this was kind of like the last hope South African team for me, and the dynamic didn't work out. Like those players still respect me as a great captain, and they like asked me to coach them all the time, but they didn't like playing with me. It was just like a social dynamic thing where they were like a little group of people, and somehow I didn't like socially fit into their group, and so I actually like I basically kicked myself from that team after captaining for a while. And we'd done all right. We'd been playing in Starladder, semi-pro division. You know, there's Star Series, then there's Pro, and then there's Semi-Pro. And we played Semi-Pro for a long time, and we'd come very close to being promoted to Pro. Actually, some people who you would recognize had played with us several times. So, like, you know, Lil from Virtus Pro. Lil used to be a stand-in for this South African team in Starlight. Like, I mean,
meet him at a tournament. You're like, "Hey, stand-in,
yeah.
how you doing?" It's funny.
No,
Wow,
so it's like the top South African gaming organization, Bravado Gaming. The Dota team now, which I was in for a while, it's called Bravado Emotion, and it's because Lil and his friends had this team that was registered in Starladder called Emotion, and so like to work around the fact that we were called Bravado, and he had a slot for us called Emotion, and that's how we like when we came back to Starladder, there was that space there, so we just became Bravado Emotion, and people always ask like what it means, but I mean you'd have to ask him. I actually met him at the Starladder LAN recently, and we chatted a bit. It was like a little bit awkward because now he's like one of the most famous people in the industry, and like
incredible
he's also
player.
just shy. And he's like incredible play. He used to play mid for us actually, like even though he's a support player, but I guess he was that good that it was just. And there's like other like Milan. I don't know if you know Milan, who's played for like No Logic Gaming, Counter or other top team. He's like from Bosnia. He's played with South Africans quite a lot. There was a stage a few years ago where Dandy played in a South African tournament because he like was really randomly like friends with one South African person, and they like wanted to surprise everyone and have him standing in. I'd known Wagamama for a long time because we played ESWC in Dota 1 qualifiers online, and I chatted to him then. So there's like connections in all sorts of places, and I guess this is a roundabout way of getting to the point that. So one of the people I knew was Durka, and that's how I got involved in casting to start with. But this is long after I was writing and all that kind of stuff. I just knew Durka, and when he first started full-time at JD, he needed more people to co-cast with him, and that conversation just kind of happened. I was just like, hey, do you want to try me out? And it seemed like it went well, and from there I just started casting with other people. Whereas the writing thing was, you guys know Marley, obviously. I guess other people all call him Mally, but I find that weird. Because kind of
yeah, we go with Mally, right, Jack?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is actually Mally, right? He told me that because it's short for Malibu, I think. But
well, I think we might be talking about a different Mally actually, because
he's talking about the 2P Mally, right? The
yeah,
Mally? Right.
Yeah. So yeah, there's Malastrix and Molly.
Oh, no,
so there's yeah.
And they're all
so,
like right into like the Dota writing scene, which is like makes it more confusing.
Yeah, the incredible thing about so I'm talking about the French 2P Mali, right? And the incredible thing there is that he was someone I had respected from afar. I had like, I was really not happy with the standard of writing in the industry, and as an like analytical person interested in thinking about what's going on, and especially in like different stuff like China, because we don't know much about China, and he would be writing articles about the Chinese scene, and they'd be interesting to me, and it was one of the few people I actually followed. And completely out of the blue, without me reaching out, I had been writing a blog for a while. It's actually still up. It's gameishard.blogspot.com. You could go find my old articles. They're probably kind of embarrassing at this stage, but he just approached me completely. He obviously he or someone who worked with him noticed my blog. He sent me an email one day and said, "Hey, do you want to write for 2P?" And I started writing for 2P. After a few months, I ended up actually getting Marley's job. I became the editor because he wanted to move on. and so that kind of put me in like a more important position, more connected. And actually, there's a this is not a story that I've told anyone, but I mean, I don't mind sharing it. I was supposed to go to WEC, which was I guess 2014, to be organized
in China.
Yeah. The LAN in China, the one that was like apparently really terrible. I was meant to go for 2P as a journalist, and I actually had I have a history of like personal issues with anxiety and depression and stuff, and I actually like was meant to take 2 flights to get to China, and in Dubai airport I had a bit of like an anxiety attack and ended up not going and came back home. And that for me was like in my career, that was almost like that was a moment where I was like, well shit, like everything's going so well in terms of my development in this industry, but if I can't travel to events, like game over kind of thing. And amazingly what happened is right after WC, after that trip failed, I got back, and like that weekend I qualified for the Pro Tour, and I like called my brother and I was like, you're coming with me to America because I have to travel. And he had offered before because my brother's very supportive to me, and so we made it into a little vacation, went to the Pro Tour, he came with me, the traveling went fine. Because the trip to WC to China was my first time traveling at all, ever, out of the country. And it was to China, and we weren't told who was going to fetch us at the airports. In fact, they said we should like just catch like 6 trains to some other city. Some other place. So it was just like really terrifying to me. And so I had this thing about like going to a totally foreign place on my own. But luckily another trip came up immediately after, and we went on that. My brother came with me and it was fine. And then, I mean, you probably would know, like earlier this year, the Star Ladder thing came up. That was on my own. Shanghai Major, I went on my own. Although my friend Marley came and met me at the airport, which was nice of him, just to like help me settle in China, you know. I'm going on tangents here, but I guess you can like collect all the information.
Yeah, that's our job, right?
It tells us about you. I totally understand how you feel, because I'm not a big fan of flying, so I have some sense of anxiety and stuff as well. But yeah, it's nice to see that that growth is happening. And Molly did mention that as well. He was like, hey, I'm gonna go make sure I pick up Scant at the airport. There's some power of friendship going on there, and he wanted to make sure that you were okay. So I'm glad that that worked out.
It's actually something he and I bonded over when we first became friends, because I don't know if you know, but he also used to have a real issue with flying and traveling. And I mean, now he lives in China and works there full time, but couple of years ago he was like afraid to go to ESL or the international, and those trips became successful for him. And then he would kind of talk me into saying like, trust me, I've done this now, it's fine, you can do it too. So it's something that two of us actually bonded over and became friends over. But yeah, it's something that I'm kind of proud of at this point, that I have traveled to 2 events on my own now in Dota, and I think they've both been successes as far as I'm concerned. Which makes me happy, because I feel like you can't really be like go all in on esports if you can't be going to events. Just like it's like a necessary part of it. I think you have to be able to at some point go to events.
Yeah, I think that consideration where it's just like you really have come to a fork in the road, and just like I'm either gonna do this or try to do this, or I can't. And yeah, it's tough. So. A lot of Dota. You just got finished covering some Dream League games, and then of course this past weekend we had DotaPit as well, where MVP.Phoenix ended up taking a 3-0 win over EG, who I believe knocked them out of the Shanghai Major. Did you get a chance? How's it been in terms of the jet lag and all that? Did you get a chance to check out DotaPit and see the evolution of the game after the major?
I had some pretty terrible jet lag when I got back, which is apparently weird. People say you're meant to get worse jet lag when you're going west to east than east to west, but I had no jet lag in China. I had a lot when I got back, but that was a long time ago now, and I've been fine. And I watched every game DotaPit pretty much. Oof. Well, I watched almost every. I mean, not every single one, because there were times when I literally just wasn't home for an hour or two. But I watched the vast majority of the games. I followed the tournament very closely. Very happy to see MVP winning it. I think it's been a very long time coming. I think they've been very good. I like completely disagree with there's these popular narratives of the TI when MVP top 8'd, and people were like, oh, they're just lucky, they got easy matchups. And then there was, they disappeared, they reformed eventually, didn't qualify for Frankfurt, come Shanghai, and they top 8 again. Well, they actually top 4. And again, there's people saying, oh, well, they only had to beat LGD and whatever. And now they win DotaPits. And I feel like we're probably at the point where even the most, diehard,
stubborn
even,
people.
yeah, even the most stubborn, like diehard anti-MVP people have to just acknowledge like this team is actually just really good at Dota, and it's something about there's just like this bias in the industry where I just feel like Southeast Asia is the scene that's watched the least by people not within the scene. And it's just this constant assumption that it's just weak, and like people like to make these sweeping generalizations. The same way people talk about CIS Dota, actually. People like to talk about Russians are just like aggressive, ha ha ha, and Southeast Asia is just like crazy. Everyone's just crazy. Pinoy this or like that's like the level of analysis that exists in the industry, which is like actually kind of pathetic. And there's a lot of real stories and real things to analyze and real developments and achievements coming from the region. So it's nice that now there's stuff that's kind of forcing people to look at it, even if a lot of people are saying that Korea is not actually Southeast Asia. I mean, in certain Dota terms, it is.
So I just want
sorry,
to,
Jack.
I just want to say, okay, go ahead.
I just want to touch on that what Scant brought up in terms of like the way that people kind of write off MVP Phoenix and kind of CIS Dota as well, because I feel like the predominant voice in terms of like people casting the game and talking about the game, when they talk about like CS Dota and the way Phoenix is played, they characterize them as like all in aggression and very like fast Dota in terms of pace, and the like implicit sort of thing that they're trying to imply is like they're saying that this kind of style is very easy to counter and you just kind of play around it and it's like a flawed way to approach the game. But when people describe teams like Virtus Pro, I don't think that team, like, it's 2016. I don't think they're just simply like an all-in like Spirit Breaker all over the map. Even though they do trap that hero a lot. Yeah. They're not just like face rush you team. They play a variety of strategies. Right.
Yeah, they're like Vega and Virtus Pro, the two most successful CIS teams of late, are like quite emphatically good at playing a clinical game and don't only play aggressively.
And even MVP Phoenix, like in that grand final against DG, they played like a 60-minute game, and they played a very patient style of draft to counter a very like time-sensitive draft from EG, like a draw strat. And I think that was just like a statement game in terms of like those armchair analysts saying like you just have to split push against them and like kind of outlast them, but they played their cards right.
I totally agree. This was, I mean, I don't know if you saw this segment, but there was a segment on the panel at the Shanghai Major toward the end where I got some funny looks from other people on the panel because it was quite late in the tournament, but I'd only been on the panel kind of late in the tournament, and I got up there and I was like, I actually just want to challenge the narrative of this tournament that every time people talk about MVP, they're talking about like how they like to run at you, and like for me, someone who's been watching the team way longer than just the Shanghai Major, I feel like for me, for the longest time, the signature thing of MVP Phoenix is that they're a team that has such a competitive professional attitude that you know how Dota players tend to tilt, whether it's in pubs or professional games. MVP are like the exact opposite of that, and it sounds weird because everyone knows about QO being feast or famine or whatever. Yeah. But the thing that I noticed when I watch MVP Phoenix is that in every single game they take each fight on its own merits. So they don't care if they've lost a fight or lost two fights or they're 10k gold behind or 20k gold behind. They're just going to think right now, with what we have and what they have, can we win a fight? And if so, how? And then they go take that fight on the merits of it. And for me, that's like a much more crucial fact in understanding MVP Phoenix than, they like to fight. They don't have to fight. The point is that they're always willing to fight if they see some angle for winning the fight. That, for me, that's just the actual standout quality of the team.
I really like that you brought that up because I think it's okay. This is hard to like. I can't really place this quote, but I remember that Eternal Envy was casting with his like Kaipi Studios with like Pilot Eye and a couple of his friends one game, and he's saying how like a certain gank won a team the game because because it failed, it allowed them to play in a certain like patient manner and like put them into like their proper form, so to speak. And what you kind of highlighted was like kind of intra-game psychology in terms of a team's resilience and ability to remove themselves from emotion and like failures or even successes. And I thought that even in that game one in particular, MVP Phoenix took like a early skirmish where they kind of smoked in 2 supports to the safe lane of EG, and they got like 2 wiped or even 3 wiped. And I thought to myself, I was like, wow, that's a play that would really define most early games and really put EG in a very comfortable position. Like I've seen this before. EG outplays like an early skirmish, and then they really give themselves the space to farm, and it's just scary from there on. But MVP Phoenix kept on making like aggressive moves and trying to make things happen on the map, and it was just all of a sudden like 10 minutes later, the score was relatively even, and MVP Phoenix was in a great position to last out the timed strat from EG.
Yeah, I think that maybe even every single team in the professional circuit right now, except for MVP, I see them as having sort of like 2 strikes. Like you lose one big fight, you pick yourselves up, you lose another big fight, and like it hits you, and it like mentally it really affects you. And I think that that's the case for every team that isn't MVP, and I really think that that's the kind of thing that should be highlighted about them. And yes, sure, it's true that they do like to fight and they do like to be aggressive, but it's so much more than that defines them as a team. For me, it really is exactly this, and I'm glad that it's something that it seems like you've seen some other things too.
Mm-hmm.
This is really interesting that you bring this up, because I kind of talked about this before. I've heard this from some others as well, but you're getting to this point where the names or like the skill level of players and the teams is I don't know if I would go this far, but I would say that it's fairly similar. Like I don't think there's too big of difference for the most part between like elite players, but I feel like it really starts to matter more how your team psychology is, as you said, like the consistency in reacting to situations, whether you tilt or not, whether you have that trust. And you could see from MVP in a lot of these team fights, they did make a lot of mistakes in the EG series, but overall their team fight execution just stayed really high. And it comes to a point where, if you do something, it's no longer about individual skill. You need to have the trust there to know that everyone's going to react properly, or a good play becomes a bad play if you don't have that in place. So I thought it was really interesting that you brought that up. I don't know if you've thought about that as well, as like almost like a singularity in terms of skill level.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and it's something that anyone who's played a lot of Dota. I mean, I don't know. In my mind, instinctively, it's like I've played Dota at a competitive level. That's what I want to say.
Yeah.
Even though
I think everyone has that.
Like,
yeah.
Like I've played a ton of Dota competitively in South Africa, and I played very briefly with a Serbian team. I don't know if they used to be called 25CM in Dota 1, and then they became 9.5 in Dota 2. I played with them for like 2 months in Dota 2, and I played analysis like at the beginning of Dota 2 for the first year or two. So like I've got some competitive exposure. I'm in the high 5k MMR range, and I feel like in my it probably doesn't. I don't know which of those facts are actually necessary to be in this position, but I feel like I can appreciate the fact that when I'm watching a game as a caster, there's almost like a kind of empathy where you can judge based on something that's happened. You get an idea of how the people on the receiving end or on the giving end might feel about it, so how it might change their psychology of going forward and back. And precisely what I'm pointing out about MVP is that I just don't think they let that stuff get to them. Or if they do, it's much, much less than other teams. And sometimes people are suspicious of it. Sometimes you can see in like the Twitch chat, for example, they think they're like, especially I've noticed when I'm casting, that people will be like, what is this person talking about? You're just like making some random shit up. Because I'm talking about how like, this thing has happened in the game, and now this team's going to play slightly differently because they, feel threatened by that, or they feel pressured by this, and for me personally, I find those kinds of things quite compelling. I mean, I'm not saying I'm always right. I think I'm pretty wrong a lot of the time about those things, but from talking to players and meeting them at events, I'm even more certain that those kinds of things do definitely factor into this level of play. There is a lot of that kind of psychology, and it's super valuable to a team like MVP that they are able to just look forward and not backwards. And I think that I saw an interview. I can't tell you who, but I'm pretty sure at some point in the last year or two, I saw an interview with one of the MVP players. I think it was probably Febby, which discussed something exactly like that. How part of the progress of both the MVP teams moving forward and developing about a year ago was recognizing that it's not valuable to argue about things that they screwed up during the game. That it's more important to kind of like, we'll talk about that after the game, but let's focus on what's in front of us, not what's behind us. And that's another way really of putting what I'm saying, that it really, like, obviously they don't just ignore what's happened in the game so far, but they're considering it in as much as it's relevant to what's about to happen, rather than dwelling on the past just because they feel like it.
I really like that. Like, I think it's important that there are people who provide analysis that go beyond maybe just what is shown on the screen. And I think that so much of like human psychology does go into competitive Dota, and whether it comes from your ability to like relate on a personal level, maybe you've had like professional experience or competitive experience, like you just mentioned, or maybe you're able to highlight like how some kind of emotion is influencing a team's play. I mean, end of the day, like what makes Dota like truly compelling in terms of the professional scene is like the way the players react and like their personalities and how they shine through in like Dota. Like there's just something specific, for example, like about RTZ's personality. Like, I swear that shines through the way he plays. And I think Twitch chat is probably in some agreement there. But
Yep,
yeah,
I
I
agree
think
with that.
yeah, like I just think it's just the most interesting stuff, and it really builds the storylines behind it. And I think the big storyline that came out of like just these past performances by MVP Phoenix, there's just that these guys are just so resilient. And there was stuff about how they have to like practice ranked on like ungodly hours on the China servers. Like I think like 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. is the only time they can get a good rank game. And maybe you can relate on that for like the South Africa like struggles. But yeah, these guys really seem truly tough-minded.
Yeah, it's Blitz said to me actually, and obviously he knows the Korean scene probably as well as anyone involved in like the Western talent, and he said that those guys just literally live Dota. That's what they do. He said he wasn't even sure if they were getting salary, but they just have a team. They have a team house, and so they don't have to pay rent or anything. And they sit in the team house together, and they play pubs all day. That's what they do. Like, and what a surprise then that so many of them are 8K. Although the big story there, by the way, I don't know what you guys have heard about this, but it's talked about a lot in a lot of the circles I've been in. Dubu, who a lot of the players have come. The North American players call him Lord Dubu. I think he was the coach of MVP Phoenix at TI5 actually, and his story is that he only started playing Dota 2 like less than 2 years ago. He didn't play Dota 1, he didn't play Han, he didn't play League. He's new to Dota 2 in a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. He started at 3.5k MMR. Today he is 7.5k MMR. He has gained 4,000 MMR in the last year and a half.
He has doubled his no. So this team, no sleep, no salary, no server, no problem. It doesn't matter. This guy, I've heard some things like that, but it's comparatively rare, right? Because there's just so much that you have to. I mean, the core of like a MOBA game is that you need to know the interactions between the heroes very precisely. So it's I mean, the talent. It's hard to imagine someone who's been playing for that short amount of time just putting people to shame, more or less.
Yeah, and he's their captain, and you'll hear a lot of the players, and I think players from the region and players from outside the region will want to give credit to Dubu overall. And I mean, obviously in a team game, you give everyone credit when there's that much success. Mm-hmm. But I think it's quite a compelling storyline actually, that from being a coach, from being just a good thinker but not that good of a player, to really just improving his own skill level to the point of he can captain the team, he can command them. And if we want to talk about like the direction that MVP have, and a lot of people think that this is what this version of MVP has that maybe previous versions didn't have, is like a very clear, crisp direction. You got to give that kind of credit to the captain for sure.
I really want to share a story right now because I feel like it has pretty good relevance, maybe. But my brother actually had like, I don't think it's like nearly as astronomical ascent as Duvu's, but he kind of grinded his way up from like 2K to like basically 5K as of like a week ago, and he's only been playing for like a year and a half. And actually, in one of the final games for him to reach his like solo 5K, he queued into like a 7K match in the middle of the day on US East, and he ran into Complexity Chessie and MVP Dubu for some reason was playing on US East in the middle of the day. And my brother randoms Anti-Mage, which is one of his best heroes, and Chessie starts to flip out in the all chat, and he's like, "This kid's not gonna swap me, like." He's going to throw this game. This 4K is going to throw this game. And Dubu was like the calming voice in the group chat. He's like, you know what? Trust this guy. I have a good feeling about him. Just let him do his thing. And like my brother like told the story, and he was like so like empowered and happy that someone, gave him a shot in this really high stakes game for him, at least for the MMR. And I think Chessie went like 8-8 on his Invoker mid, and my brother went like 9-1 on his Anti-Mage, went out of control, and it was just one more brick in the wall that was his 5K achievement. And yeah, I just thought that was so characteristic of just what you just described, like a perfect Dubu story.
it's a great story, and honestly, my impression of MVP from the major, I don't know how you feel about them, Jack, but it's a spooky thing. Like I really wanted to talk to him because I felt like I was really invested in this team and I'd followed them for a long time coming to the tournaments, and I think a lot of the talent coming in were just like, oh, it's a random Southeast Asian team, whatever. But I wanted to talk to them, but I was too shy because I didn't like know them. I didn't like know how to approach them. But every time I saw them, they all just looked so happy. They're like I'd be like in the lounge room or whatever eating, and they'd just come in, and I mean obviously they have reason to be happy. They're winning a lot of games, but they would like come into the room and kind of look around with a huge smile on their face, and then they'd leave. But it's almost like I struggle to imagine the players in MVP like having bad attitude in the way you imagine Dota players having bad attitude, because they just like they seem like they've gotten past that. They've conquered that, and they're just mature about it. And this part of me is like worried that this is like I'm somehow like just exoticizing Korean people or something like. but like that totally is the impression I get. I mean, if I spoke to them, it might turn out that I'm like, oh, they're just random people like everyone
Normal
else.
dudes, yeah.
It's easy to talk about this stuff in hindsight, because obviously, like, we say, oh, the team had, like, an aura about them or something. It really was a little different, though, the way they carried themselves. They were really, really happy to be there. I spoke with one of the players just randomly, got into the conversation about, like, pub Dota and, like, like, whatever, when one of your players decides to go to the jungle because he didn't get a lane, all that stuff. It was just, like, totally out of nowhere that we went there. But I did get a sense of that. I think the other kind of like raw joy, the only other real instances that I felt from that were some of the newer teams really. I think Team Unknown from Frankfurt had that about them as well. They were just like really happy to be there and feel that they, that they belong and that they had made it there. And in this case of MVP, I mean, it's really fascinating because, again, you don't want to exoticize or stereotype people, but then you kind of wonder, the Koreans have been good in esports, a lot of different games, StarCraft and stuff, and League of Legends as well. And they do have a cultural distinctness. It's this sense of what a college professor described to me as this usness. And so if that has some kind of impact on their psychology or how they regulate in and out of Dota and how they adjust to things, that could be like really important. And we talk about how important psychology and team psychology is. That maybe that does give some kind of edge, and there is just a difference there. And as you mentioned, I mean, it's almost like they're playing with house money, right? This is a game that's kind of been in some ways left behind in Korea, and that hasn't stopped them. And yeah, if they love the game, talk about some of the players like Febby, I think, used to play in North America. March definitely used to be in North America. I think they were part of the group of Korean players that went over to Korea, which included Blitz and some others. And then to just see them like stay there and stick it out and just keep growing, it's really nice to see that continuity kind of, taking hold and sprouting.
There's a funny story there actually about how the majority of MVP Phoenix are not like completely or originally Koreans from Korea, like because Kyo is also from Australia, right? And like God likes to claim him all the time because Kyo, I think, grew up in Australia and then moved to Korea. And there's the two who played in America and still do sometimes play in America and then move to Korea. So certainly like that complicates things, right? If we are going to talk about like a cultural explanation.
True.
But it also, I don't know, maybe it positions them uniquely to sort of understand the context they're engaging with as well as their own context. I mean, that's for me. That's at least the beginnings of something that sounds like a plausible, not completely bullshit explanation. I mean, I'm kind of speculating, but I find it fascinating. I mean, you and I, Jack, we spoke about Chinese culture quite a bit when I was in China, and this is something I was interested in too. And I was asking people, everyone I could, and trying to read things. And definitely, I think that there's real room for discussion about vastly different cultures having, some effect on different psychology, which has some effect on how different teams from different countries might approach the game. I think that's. I mean, the most obvious example is, if you contrast the West to China, I think at the time that LGD first made LGD Int, there was a big discussion about this, and I think Misery got interviewed back then, or PyCats or someone when they were in LGD Int, and they were just talking about how, Western or European or American Dota players see Dota as an art. And
yes. I remember
as opposed to, Chinese see it as work.
As a skill to be practiced
Yeah.
and trained. Yeah.
And so if you're in China, it's just the norm. It's understood. You will live in a team house. You will do 8 hours a day or more. And in the West, the vast majority of professional players in the West think that's ridiculous. Like they just, I mean, and the chances are they put in the same amount of hours anyway of their own accord, like playing pubs and doing stuff like that. But it's like there's a different view on what it means to be a disciplined player and what it means to how you should treat the craft. And I certainly think there's an explanation somewhere in here to fit Koreans in and say, well, whatever the Korean view is on this kind of thing, like, is it a craft, is it an art, is it a, like, maybe that is the best view when it comes to esports in general, because, South Korean people just seem to have done really well in every esports that they tried.
Yeah, you've just generated some real awesome questions for sure, and I think we can talk a little bit about the Chinese scene now, which was one of the big surprises of the Shanghai Major and the reshuffle and such. But yeah, I remember talking about this with you and some others, and Cinderin and Toby and Winter as well, and Cinderin obviously phrased it much better than I could, talking about how if you have that kind of Chinese outlook on things where they're in a team house all the time, sometimes they're very tightly controlled and stuff, it makes it so that and they're practicing basically with other teams, or not really pubbing, or maybe not taking as much out of pubs as maybe Western players would. That could start to affect them depending on, say, the metagame or the relative strength of the teams. And you talk about culture as well. Again, it's hard to make too many generalizations and such, but maybe it'd be much harder for maybe more individualistic cultures or players to live in that team house together. Maybe they'd get stirred crazy and just want to kill each other after a while. So it's better for them to stay on their own and kind of get more from public games versus from that team setting. So yeah,
I think it should. I mean, so this is one. There's like this weird view in esports that making comparisons to sports is like terrible or something, but I actually think there's so many valuable things that esports could learn from sports, and I think this is one of them. So most sporting teams that I know of anyway, the players all live quite near to each other, like in the same area in the same city, but not in the same house. I think that's the ideal setup for a professional Dota team, in my opinion. Would be exactly that. You all live in close proximity to each other, and there's like an office or like an internet cafe or whatever where you all go to train together every day, but you don't have to, like, outside of playing together and having meetings and stuff, you don't have to be in each other's space all the time. Because I do feel like, regardless of which country and what your culture is, like, being forced to interact with that person non-stop, for me it's just like, why not rather just have the option of, if you want to, you can interact with them non-stop, but if you want to, you also don't have to, and you're just close enough that for the purpose of your actual work, you can be in the same place as much as you need to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense in terms of finding some kind of medium between, people who live on the same continent but entirely different cities and areas and communities, and then the Chinese approach, which is like, just put 5 dudes and a chef and a maid and make them live together and play Dota 24/7. And like you said, like, if they really desire to just put in ridiculous amounts of time, there's nothing stopping, people who, like, neighbors, like, who are potentially teammates, just to stay at the cafe or stay at the workplace, quote unquote workplace, all night, all day. Yeah, I definitely agree with that idea. I think, like, a lot of the Western, like, the big, like, kind of captains and, like, big personalities in Western Dota, they make kind of quick judgments on the viability of, like, team houses, like, specifically, like, Eternal Envy. I remember when he was back in speed gaming and kind of early Cloud9 period, the team kind of experimented with a team house, I think, in China at one point. Like, they tried to establish something like that and train there. I don't know if you remember this, Scant. Like,
yeah.
Right, like, it was going to be centered around a couple of Chinese tournaments they were going to compete in, and it was kind of a big deal. And they ended up actually just staying in, like, a hotel because of, poor management, because that was really rot in that situation.
I think it's around the same time that they had clairvoyance coaching them.
Yeah, and they tried to, like, have, like, a team house arranged, but that wasn't actually going to be the case, and so they ended up staying in a hotel, and it was just kind of a disaster. And ever since then, Envy kind of turned his back to, like, the team house concept, and then they were still kind of boot camping before tournaments as well, and then, like, and staying in a house together, like, for maybe 2 weeks at a time, 3 weeks at a time, and then gradually that also went away. And then since that kind of period of time, we just haven't seen really many Western teams at all take that kind of experiment with those kinds of housing situations. And I think even EG, who have, housing for other gaming teams, none of the EG players have really considered that since that team has started. So yeah, I think that's interesting.
It's a more general problem in the industry. I think I could talk for days about the power dynamics of the industry, but basically, I think that our industry developed in a very sort of sudden way when a lot of money came in, and the result is that if you compare it to sports, a lot of the sports that have a lot of money in them didn't always have a lot of money in them. The money increased gradually, and with the money came infrastructure, professional standards, norms, the way things are done. And in Dota, the money just kind of got dumped. And there's players with a lot of power because the players are the ones who win the money. But all of the other stuff about like how the media works, how management works, how like teams operate, sportsmanship, support stuff, none of that stuff is really sorted out. It has to sort itself out on the way there. But unfortunately, the people with the most power to decide how those things work are the players themselves. And a lot of the time now, I think kind of what you're getting at, and I think this is generally the case, a lot of the time these issues, which are very, very important to how the industry works, are decided on the whims of players. It's just like, it's not like there's a meeting or like a player will hire some consultants to discuss. It's just like, the thoughts occurred to me on this day at this time, and this is what I was feeling then, and now we've made a decision about that for the next year.
Yeah, a huge business decision that influences, a huge organization because, something just didn't work out one time, and, that
was interesting. It was like the puberty kind of esports, right? Sudden kind of unbalanced growth, more or less, but that does bring up some interesting issues. You talked about, kind of having a separate professional setting. It's kind of like a workplace. Like obviously we don't live with for example, our coworkers and stuff like that. But that is interesting that you bring that up because it's almost like, it starts to raise questions about what is the ideal kind of psychology for a team. Obviously, you want it to be kind of like, maybe in a utopia, you want it to be this like kind of kumbaya state where everyone's on the same page. But is that achievable or is that possible? And does culture factor into that? And it's one of those things where, like if any of you have ever lived with your friends before, say, in college or something like that, it becomes very different once you have to live with someone and be with them the whole time. But if you can keep that kind of distance, or, does it matter if you're at each other's throats? Because we've seen teams that maybe didn't get along the best or really like each other that much still produce some successful results. So it's all hard to say at this point, and it's a really interesting mix of cultures and philosophies and that. And as you mentioned, a lot of very whimsical stuff too, and not developed yet.
Yeah, again, this is somewhere where it's not clear to me why we wouldn't just look at sports and be like, well, like, is there any sporting industry where it's the norm that the entire team lives together? That, like, I don't think so. It's very normal for them to train together and live close enough to their training grounds where they can go there every day if they need to. But living together, exactly as you say, you could be close friends with someone, live with them, and then ruins your friendship. That's the thing that can happen, and I don't see why it needs to be necessary. And I almost feel like the original insistence, maybe not from the Chinese side, but certainly from Western teams that have dabbled with or toyed with the idea of living together, I feel like there's a sense in there which is about how it's super important that your team gets on well with each other and becomes good friends. And there's an extent to which obviously if you hate each other, it's not going to work. But at the same time, again, for me, that's like a naive or undeveloped approach to the way the industry works in general. I don't think it's that important that players in a team be good friends with each other or like each other a lot. They need to just like each other enough to function together and communicate. And I think that if players move more in the direction of seeing what they're doing as a job, as an actual profession, then we could get there. A lot of people say that EG are a bit like that as a team, that they all sort of treat it as work. I'm not sure if there are other teams that have been described that way, but like something comparable for me is, I don't know if you saw recently, there was an interview with 71 or 71, I'm not sure how you say it, from eHome.
Yeah.
And in the interview, he kind of let on that he kind of has the power to just decide who's in that team. Like he said something about how he was asked why he chose Fenrir and Isis as the new players, and he said something about how he chose them despite the fact that the current players hadn't suggested them and they weren't on their suggested players list, as if he gets to choose. And
wow.
That's the way it works. Again, that's the way it works in every sport, right? Can you name a sport where players choose their own teammates? It's like, this is a purely esports thing. And again, it's because of the way esports started and where it comes from. And in Dota, that's even more clear that, with things starting with being community based and developing to that point. But to me, there's obvious benefits of having, a coach or a manager who could select teammates for you. And it's not obvious to me why there's something special about Dota that in Dota, as opposed to any other team exercise where, let's forget about sports. Let's talk about like businesses. Like, how common is it that you get hired to work on a team for work, for whatever, consulting, or say you're a lawyer or a doctor, and the people on the team choose one another. That's just not a principle of teamwork that exists anywhere in the world except in esports, as far as I know.
Yeah,
so I don't see what. Sorry.
Yeah.
You want to say this?
I was going to say, yeah, as a basketball fan, I only remember that really being like an issue when, when, I don't know if you follow basketball, but like LeBron James got together with Dwayne Wade to form this kind of dream team, and they had an issue where that was like a big thing where it's like, what, these players, are they colluding to like play together and stuff? And then this brings up all you talked about as well with like the other incentives, like maybe people don't want the friendship to maybe become a conflict of interest or become jeopardized by that professional relationship. But yeah, sorry to step in there, but yeah, keep on going.
No. Just to finish off the point, that's really in an ideal world, I feel like if you have an independent person selecting the team, then you can be guaranteed that the person who's selecting the team is interested only in how good the team is and how likely it is to win. Whereas as soon as it's players self-selecting and selecting each other, there's all sorts of other influences that could come into play, and they might be, as I'm suggesting, and where we got to this topic in the first place, there might be maybe too much influence based on like who will get on with who and how good people will be, like how close they will to be as friends. I'm not so sure how much that stuff matters or how much it needs to matter. And obviously this leads to a different discussion about the availability of coaches and if coaches can, make sense as a thing in the industry right now. But I'm gonna, spoiler, I think they can. I think it's something we should be pushing for. I think that's something that teams should be pushing for.
So yeah, you've got an article coming out soon, right, on coaching and stuff. You want to give us any kind of a sneak preview or what you're going to say? Because you've had a lot to say on this topic, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, actually, I had an article coming out on coaching last Thursday already, and I've been really bad about it. It's been delayed a million times, but I suppose the basic line that I want to take in my article is that it shows something about lack of professionalism or professional diligence. It shows something about teams, I think, being lazy. That for the longest time, most of the teams, especially in the West, when asked about coaching, have been like, well, who would be my coach? Like, anyone who's good enough to coach me would surely be playing in the events already. And where I go with this is, I know there's the classic arguments of like, oh, there's like successful coaches in sports who weren't the best players. That's not actually where I'm going. I think that in that respect, Dota might actually be different. But it's more like Dota players expect other people to like convince them why it's worth their while to hire someone as a coach, and I think that is really, really weird. I think that if you're really seeing yourself as a Dota player and this is your job, this is what you do, you'll do everything to win, then you should be taking the initiative to like, I expect teams to be sitting there in their team room or in their meeting or whatever, brainstorming ways that they might make use of a coach. And I don't see teams taking that kind of initiative. It's just like, oh, there's no obvious candidates that would be useful to us, like why bother? And it's the weirdest thing to me, especially because Valve, for all their events, offered to have 7 people flown to the event, and most teams are not using those slots for coaches. Like, most teams have a manager and then like someone's girlfriend or someone's partner or someone's friend that gets flown on Valve money. And it just seems absurd to me that even if there isn't an obvious candidate, why doesn't the team get together and be like, well, there's this particular thing that we might use if we had someone with this skill set to help us with this kind of thing. It doesn't have to be Belba who's doing the drafting for you. Like, that's not the only way to conceive of a coach, right? And to me, it's just a bit of a disappointment that there's something ironic about the article I'm writing in the first place. It's a bit of a disappointment that people like me need to write articles like this, and it's not the other way around, that the teams themselves are the ones taking the initiative, trying to develop coaching as a part of the industry.
That's a really interesting point, and we can take a look at Shanghai. For example, Liquid had Bulba, I believe, and Blitz to some extent coaching them, and then obviously Secret with 1437. And I think you quoted Envy saying that without him they would have come in last or something. Maybe an exaggeration, but maybe not. To what extent he meant that. And some other teams that finished well had coaches as well, and I believe Fnatic, for example. So maybe we'll start to see that start to make a difference more and more. And of course, obviously, Bulba coached EG at TI5 as well. So yeah, I think it's interesting that you bring that up, and maybe that's the next step in terms of professionalization and further development is finding ways that someone can add that value to their team.
And again, it's in other esports, it's already become more of a thing. It's very common in Counter-Strike, very common in League of Legends, and actually, League of Legends is a great example because it's also a MOBA. It's very similar, and guess what? I don't follow League that closely. I follow it closely enough to know these basic facts that the best League of Legends teams are Korean teams, and the Korean League of Legends teams, the coaches are more respected than the players. They're like
Wow.
if they say something, the players do it. That's like, and it's the weirdest thing to me. I guess I don't know the league scene as well as most people. I'm not like closely following League, but it's a strange thing that if they're the best teams in League and they're the ones that take coaching so seriously, why doesn't the rest of the world do the same thing in League? And I guess for this discussion, I'm saying in Dota and other esports too. It's like, if the people who are the best are doing something, shouldn't you be interested in trying to do that thing too? Because maybe that's part of what makes them the best.
Yeah, it's fascinating that you brought up 71 as well, Penny, with his team, and as you said, the decision making there. Because, if we go with that paradigm you talked about earlier, where the Chinese see it as like work or a workplace, then the coach is the person selecting your coworkers, as you said. And, but then if you have, say, maybe a more individualistic or maybe a more Western culture, it's kind of like, hey, like this chemistry has to matter. We have to feel that the chemistry is more important for us to selecting these teammates and coworkers and stuff. So we can't have someone else making those decisions, or maybe the place of the coach, as you mentioned, isn't as revered or as respected. It's a little bit different. So that's all really interesting stuff to consider. And I really hope that it does trend towards more coaching, and that gives more people in esports an opportunity as well. So I think that's a good thing overall.
Yeah, it's. When it comes to 71, it's the cool thing is that his results really speak for themselves. So there's no one who can say like, oh, that's just a different way to do things, but who knows if it works. Like, it's the most standout, obvious fact in the history of Chinese Dota that all of the teams he's coached have been successful, all of them. And I don't know if he's had the same kind of decision-making power on all of them. I suspect he probably has, actually. And he's also someone who was never a professional player. I don't believe that he even could be. I'm not sure. I think I read an interview with him some point a year or two ago where he said he's not that good at the game. He's like kind of good, but not that good. So that's also something really interesting.
He's known for his skills in terms of salesmanship and stuff as well. Just a charismatic guy. But let's keep it in China for a little bit. Have you had a chance to look at kind of the Chinese reshuffle and the new rosters coming out after the Shanghai Major? Anything that
Yeah,
out to you?
I've looked at quite a lot of them. My favorite Chinese team of the current season from the get-go is actually Wings. And they're literally the only team that has made no changes.
Okay.
Which is really funny because like I'm like a big advocate of teams making changes, and I'm always like, when teams don't make changes for a really long time, I'm always criticizing that because you're probably getting sick of it now, but the easiest way to make this point is with a sports comparison, which is, again, like, do you know of a sports team that is the best team in the world and stays the best team without getting any new players? Like, it's just like, doesn't happen. But there's a lot of reasons you can actually explain that, and in Dota I think it's especially the case because Dota players are so good at learning things from each other. So if a team is very clearly the best, everyone is going to watch them, learn what they do, learn all the things they're good at, and be able to imitate it. And if the things that make you the best become like commonplace skills that everyone has, like, a lot of the time what you need is a new influence to stay the best. I think it was a great move by EG to replace a player after winning TI. I'm not sure about like who they replaced or the replacement they made. I don't have the kind of internal information to say if that was the right change, but that they made a change at all was great, and I was really happy to see Vega made a change today. But Wings, despite making no changes, are the team that I like the most from the Chinese shuffle because I don't think they've been together for that long that it's necessary for them to get a change. They haven't been at the top of the game, so it's not like they're suffering from this weakness of everyone studied them. And actually, this precisely the thing that impresses me most about Wings is that they're like a complete enigma to me. I have cast and watched many of their games, and I more often than not don't understand what they're doing, and they just own. And I think that's really cool. For me, it's like really fascinating that they like quite consistently win, and I can't figure out like what they're doing until they win. I remember a very memorable game that I cast of theirs. I think they beat both Liquid and Vega at Star Ladder.
Yeah.
And I don't know which game it was, but one of those games they had like an offlane Slaughter, and their supports were Chen and I think Vengeful Spirit. And the Slaughter just joined the Chen and Vengeful Spirit at literally level 1 without even going to lane.
I saw that.
And like smoked. And they were just like smoking around the map and like ganking random people, and I was just like, was this like the plan in the draft that you have 3 heroes smoke ganking from level 1? Like, how is this even a
it's
thing?
The brigade.
So it's not that they do that. If they did that every time, I'd be like, oh well, that's the Wings thing. But it's more like they find individual new novel ways to approach the game, which it honestly makes me think that whoever's drafting for them, whoever makes the decisions or strategies, is just like got a totally different paradigm of thinking about the game to what I have or what any of the other people that I've watched and analyzed have, and it really just fascinates me. It really like, and they've looked solid so far. I mean, I think later on today, or I don't know what time it is where you are tomorrow. I guess they're in the winner bracket final of the ESL qualifier. They're playing against IG Vitality, I think. And
that's no joke. That's
I think a lot of people. A lot of people think IG Vitality is actually the best team at the moment. I think Wings look better. I think the low bracket teams are the 2 Vici teams, who, if you had to ask me, like of the teams that have changed their roster, those are actually the 2 that impressed me the most. Is the 2 Vici teams.
I see. Wings qualified for WC as well, right? It felt like they won some events here and there. They're a little bit under the radar. Their manager before Jason is also a bit of an unconventional guy in that sense as well. So we talk about where the game is going to go and hope that it doesn't stagnate somehow or just depend on patch to patch, and that's something that could be really interesting. And the reason I like that you said that kind of brigade formed with like the starter is because I think we've all seen an occasional game where like maybe like a carry or some hero that usually wants to sit in lane is forced off their lane or they can't lane there, and they end up just kind of running around looking for kills, and it becomes like a very odd, like unexpected type of rotation. It ends up working out even. So if people start finding things like that, I think that adds a lot of flavor to Dota and a lot of new possibilities for how these heroes are interpreted. And that's kind of like the lifeblood of the game, right? As long as you keep having those new things to look forward to.
Yeah, and these guys, I think Wings actually I believe they came 4th in the TI5 qualifiers in China, and they came 4th in the Shanghai Major qualifiers, or the Frankfurt, one of the major qualifiers and the TI qualifiers. They came 4th. They also qualified for WCA. They also went to Star Ladder. I mean, they haven't like placed at the top of any of these events really. Although at WCA, I think they might have come 3rd or 4th. No, not 3rd, obviously, because LGD was 3rd, but they might have been 4th. Not sure. We have to check that. Remember them getting some kind of finish there.
Yeah, it says 4th right here. This is crazy, actually. I didn't even realize they had such a good placing.
So this is a team that's like stayed under the radar, despite the fact that actually for a team that stayed under the radar, they've had a lot of very good results. And I'm happy for them to stay together because I feel like there's still like that one last push for them. Almost they're in a similar position to how I would have thought of CDEC last year this time. Yeah. Like maybe. Like CDC probably should have made changes right after TI. I think it was like a mistake for people to celebrate they didn't. And probably Wings after TI should make changes too. But for this last run, I think they can give it a push and impress people.
It's really fascinating how this, like a lot of these like Chinese reshuffle rumors just really just crystallized like literally days before these Manila qualifiers had to get going, right? And like I guess everyone was still hypothesizing and thinking about how good the teams would be, like looking at the new LGD with Xiao 8 and maybe, and they were like, these guys look really good. And then the results from Manila came in like the next day, and it's like, wait, they're out already in the first round, and that was like a huge heartbreaker probably for a lot of the Chinese Dota fans.
Yeah,
and
I mean, I do want to say, I think it's part. There's like we've seen too little of them to really know what's going on.
Yeah,
it's like obviously it's like factually, LGD being out means they can't get to ESL, but there's still a decent chance LGD could end up being the strongest of all of them. Like, that could happen. And LGD in particular, the organizationally, the way LGD's teams have been for the longest time, for pretty much all of Dota 2, they've been teams that progressively get stronger the closer it gets to TI. And by the time you get to TI, whichever team is LGD is normally, you know, either the best or strong or second best Chinese team and doing really well. So, you know, my opinions about, I say that Vici and Vici Gaming Reborn and Wings are the teams that look strongest to me right now, but that literally means from like 2 days of play, and you know, going forwards, who knows? LG and Vici Gaming have both been invited to Star Ladder, the up and coming one. I saw that announced today, and I think either one of them could do really well there. And I almost hope that they do, because there's this like weirdly popular narrative all of a sudden that like, I don't know, people are just so comfortable explaining the fact that Chinese teams didn't top, like none of them top 8 at the Shanghai Major, as if it's like an easy to explain normal occurrence or something. And it's like to me it's still like the freakiest thing. Like, I would, you know, I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but like if tomorrow someone told me that there was some like, you know, all the Chinese teams are like paid off or something, or like I'd honestly believe that, because the current facts just don't add up to me. It's just like, we can talk about Chinese New Year, we can talk about like there's financial problems in China where like players don't treat the game correctly because they're too interested in streaming, or we can talk about all those things, but nothing explains that at MDL 3 weeks before the major, all of those teams look good. All of them. Not just eHome won the tournament. They all looked good. If you watched their games, they were playing good Dota. And you get to the Shanghai Major, and none of them top 8. And the Western teams, I spoke to players, and they were like, said that the Chinese teams looked bad in scrims already, and they thought they were trolling. I remember, I think Matumberman told me that he thought eHome was just trolling. He was like, Liquid scrimmed eHome a few times, and they just were sure that eHome were trolling because they were so bad. And it was like, everyone coming to the tournament thought that eHome would be a guaranteed top 3 based on MDL. And that's the thing. I mean, the top Western teams were just as surprised as anyone else. Like, it's weird that the narrative changes to like include what happened as if it was expected to happen. But honestly, there's no analyst, there's no player going to that event who would have said that no Chinese teams were top 8. Everyone thought that most of them were top 8. Like, it's so. To me, it's that, like, until I learn more facts about the scene, that will always be a big mystery to me. And unfortunately, I probably never will, because unfortunately the Chinese scene has this, like, no one tells you anything. There's this, like, unwritten agreement.
Firewall of China, great firewall.
Jack said, yeah, this is the great firewall of Chinese Dota. Jack's had this experience many times, I'm sure, where you just, like, ask a player something and they just literally ignore your question. They just
stare at you.
Yeah, like you said, you know, in hindsight, it's easy to put these narratives together. But, you know, again, you talk about Chinese New Year, and it's like, really, if they just didn't play for like a week or two, would that just result in that? Or does that say something about their schedule or their regimen and how important that is? Is there maybe a type of deal where they usually have a reshuffle and the contracts are usually up around Chinese New Year time, and they're kind of expecting that, but this time they had to stay together for the major? I mean, it's really hard to say, but yeah, I think a lot of people were surprised. I mean, I remember, like, you know, Fnatic would talk about, hey, we're just destroying these teams in like scrims and stuff, and it's just like, what is going on? What happened? And at the same time, though, I'm really glad that, as you mentioned with the changes and stuff, a lot of the new blood is starting to get a chance to, you know, this is definitely a prevailing narrative as well, that there's too much maybe veneration for these old names and these old legends, and you have to give new blood a chance. And you're seeing with some of these rosters, you've talked about Wings, not a particularly well-known team. We're talking about IG Vitality, which was supposed to be the IG main team. Also, not a lot of really recognizable names, mostly recent additions. And then we talk about, you know, Vici Gaming, probably one of the better known teams, but they have 2 players in their supports who aren't as well known. And then same with Vici Reborn, other than FY and ZYF. So you're starting to see these people really get a chance, and, you know, maybe there really is like a lot of talent in China, and, you know, this is what you need. You kind of need these seismic changes to shake things up and give them a chance to surface.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is that, I mean, I do like more people getting a chance. I dislike the popular narrative that there's some kind of like revolution in China, and like for the first time ever, young players are getting a chance. And there's an old god problem, but it's not that sharp of a turn. It's not that, when Chon says in an interview that, oh, the West got Arteezy and Eternal Envy and Zai, and we got no one. Like, I just think that's not true. I think that's like Chon being emotional because, like, for me, FY and Rabbit and ZYF and
maybe even
there's
CDEC,
and maybe
all of CDEC.
exactly. There's players you can point to who actually fulfill a very similar position. So, I mean, it is true that China historically, and this is like around the time I started reading Marley's work, actually, when he was writing for 2P, the stuff he was writing about was exactly this: that China had a problem. They didn't have youth teams. They had no, like, they might struggle in a few years' time. And he called this shit back then. But they also started dealing with this shit back then. They really did. Like, it's a few years ago now that teams started having these youth teams, the Vichy Gang Potential and Newbie Young, and all of these youth teams, all these analysis leagues, and all of these players we just listed coming into the scene are examples of how China has been trying to address this issue for quite a while. Now, you can talk about whether they've been doing it reluctantly or not. That's something else. But they have been doing it, and this is just, the biggest example to date of, like, the highest number of new players all at once coming into big teams. That's all.
All right. Well, let's be interesting to see what comes of that tournament and who emerges from that. So, Scant, we've had you for a really long time. Is there anything that it's getting late for you over there? Is there anything that you'd like to mention out to the fans, or anything else you'd like to talk about?
Do you think I have fans? Is that?
Of course you do. You should have quite a few more after this. This has been really just a lot of fun.
This is going to be, after this podcast, I'm going to have, like, okay, how many people will listen to the podcast? Let's, real talk. Let's.
It remains to be seen, Mr. Scant. It remains to be seen.
It's up to you.
Don't
look at us.
Yeah. You've done your part. So now we'll just have to do ours.
Okay, because let's say that like 5% of the people who listen to the podcast become my fan. I'm just trying to. Okay, maybe this is not the conversation to have right now.
I was gonna say, dude, don't discredit your fans before they even made, right?
I mean, well, look, to be honest, anyone who listens through the entire thing, I feel like in like these long form kind of discussions, same when I write articles, like people who like read my entire article, I always feel like that person just must be my fan already or something, because people in this industry have a very short attention span. It's I don't know. I don't really have much more to say. Like, I've enjoyed. I mean, it is late, so I'm tired, but I've enjoyed this discussion. I like talking. I actually would like to be on more of these kinds of like shows and podcasts and stuff. I did one last week with like Fountain Camping, I think it's called. Don't think we got that many views, but it was still fun anyway, just to like chat and.
Yeah, we would love to have you, man. There's so much more that I can think of that just bottle it up, and when your coach's article comes out, we'll definitely, we'll want to talk about that and other stuff as well. And then as the restructuring and the reshuffling starts to crystallize a little bit, and we start to see these teams maybe perform with their new rosters, and maybe we get more news of the Western changes, we'll definitely want your thoughts on that as well. So it's been nice having you, and we hope to have you back.
Yep. I would say tentatively that it's quite likely that if you invite me back on the show, that I'll say yes. Obviously schedule dependent, but as you can see, I do lots of things in a day, and that's okay. That's fine.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us, and for those of you 5%. Yeah, go ahead.
Hang on, I can't remember who. But I told someone recently that I was going to be on this podcast, and then they told me, like, that's amazing, I love Wood Shrew so much, and I'm trying to remember who it was.
Please recall that, because we'll definitely, whoever that is. Mystery admirer of Wood Shrew, if you're out there, let us know, or follow us on Twitter. He is at Wood Shrew Dota. We are at DotP_show. I am at KBBQ&nbsp, and of course, for those of you 5% who have suddenly become fans of Scant, although I'm sure it's going to be more than 5%, he is on Twitter at Scantzor, that's SCANTZOR, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And for those of you who want to follow our shows, of course, defenseofthepatients.com, that's defense with an S, and You can follow us on iTunes, and if you click through the banner on Amazon, you can support us as well. So obviously, thank you for listening into this latest episode. Any final shout-outs before we go?
No, you gotta stop asking me because I'm like really bad at signups. You know, when I when I first started casting with Dirk, I actually asked him because like at the end of every single match, he'd ask me if I had any final comments, and I actually messaged him after the first week, and I was like, just don't ask me, just sign off the broadcast without saying anything to me because you're gonna keep asking me, and I'm gonna feel awkward and not know what to say. just end the show.
All right. Well, as you wish, Scant. Thank you very much, and we'll have you on again soon. Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you next time.